Every time I would stand up, my heart would go 160, 170, to the point where one night it was so bad that they had to rush me to ICU in order to give me norepinephrine. And it wasn't really, AJ, for me about dying so much as not fulfilling my potential. I'm just saying when it comes to purpose and it comes to potential, they bleed together very, very closely. That I have to actually allow myself to just realize that maybe you don't have to be excellent at something. Maybe the point is to just do and to be and to experience and to live. Maybe that's the point.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Code 3 Life Reinvented. I'm your host, AJ Jones. And I would just want to start off by saying thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking time out of a busy day to join me in this conversation that I'm going to have with someone who's got quite a story to share. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute, but before I do, I want to point out that my guest today is a keynote and speaker and has done a TEDx, and he formerly comes from the corporate world. And we're going to discuss his Code 3 moment and where that led him. But now he is a board-certified wellness coach and journalist who helps executives regain composure, clarity, and strategic focus after a crisis. I will now introduce today's guest, and I'm going to do it very carefully. It is Savio P. Clemente, and I'm adding the P because I was just informed before we started recording that there is a Savio Clemente out there who's a Brazilian wrestler, and we do not want to confuse today's guest with that individual. So Savio P. Clemente, welcome to Code 3 Life Reinvented.
AJ, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone listening and viewing. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you being here. And as I like to do in these interviews is I want to start off straight up and just get right into it. Tell me about your Code 3 moment.
My Code 3 moment, it's very clear. 2014, June, I was on a trip with a friend, Amsterdam, London, and Paris. I noticed that I was having drenching night sweats. That's strange. I'm in Europe. I shouldn't really be having this.
You said you were in Amsterdam, right?
I wasn't. Yes, that's true. That's true. Maybe some of the windows, if you've been to Amsterdam, you know what I mean? Or some of the cafes could have caused it, if you know what I mean. I came home, and at the time, I was one of those individuals who didn't even take aspirin. Not that I was averse to medication. I just didn't need it or didn't feel like I needed it. So I never did that. So I did see a naturopath who I was seeing for about 7 years, and he looked at my blood work and he's like, Mr. Clemente, this is very odd. I can name 3 things that this could be, but I want you to go seek mainstream medicine. And I ended up getting a sonogram. They wouldn't let me leave the office for about an hour and a half. They asked that a family member come pick me up, even though I drove there. Dad did. And then we went to the hospital and they rushed me. An hour later, they admitted me into the hospital. And then about a day later, they told me I had stage 3 Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was bedridden for a week because they had to distend about 8 liters of fluid from my abdomen. I had something called ascites, and the lymphoma was mixed in with that. It was about a total of 15 days in the hospital. A couple of days before I left, they told me I needed to start my first round of chemo. It's called R-CHOP, and they said I would need about 6 rounds total. So I ended up leaving the hospital in June of 2014, and I did about 5 rounds of chemo every 3 weeks. And about 7 or 8 days before Christmas, I ended up doing my scans, and they told me I was in remission. And I was in remission for about a decade, and then the story continues.
And I'm so glad that you're here today and with us to tell your story, but I want to hear the second chapter before we go any further.
So the second chapter is I was taking care of myself as best I could. So just to reiterate, before the cancer that I had in 2014, I ate quote unquote correct, hormone-free protein, vegetables, the right amount of carbs. I was exercising 6 days a week. I was doing boxing. I was doing spinning. I was doing strength training. I was taking vitamins. I'm a longtime meditator. At that point, I was meditating for about 15 years, 20 minutes a day. I was someone who journaled. I wrote. Only thing in my life that I will say from an energetic point of view was that I was in a business relationship with 3 others, and it just wasn't going well. There was a lot of stress on the business, but also on 2 individuals in that business formation. And I think I absorbed a lot of it, and I don't think I was very vocal about that. I'm not saying that was the cause of it, but I'm reflecting back, that definitely was a big strain in my life at the time. Beyond that, I was seeing my oncologist. I had to see a new one because the old one left the practice. And after 5 years of getting scans and doing my blood work, the office said to me, Savio, we really like you, but you don't have to come after 5 years, because after 5 years, it's very, very unlikely that it's going to come back. I said, can I just come of course you can, but you don't have to. So I continued seeing my oncologist for an additional 5 years. And actually in July of 2024, so now we're fast tracking about 10 years, I got my normal blood work done. He's like, this looks good. There's no major issues. And I said, well, Dr. Steinberg, I was like, I've just been noticing. So I came back from a trip to India. I did about a month. It was a media visit, a journalistic coverage of 8 cities in India. So I came back from that trip, and I noticed that I was experiencing nasal congestion and intermittent ear fullness. This wasn't on my trip. This was maybe even a month or so before that trip. And he's like, okay, that's fine. I'm like, well, I'm going to go see an ENT. My ENT was in the city. And he's like, okay, just tell him to send the information. We'll put it in your file. No big deal. He's like, I'll see you in a year. I'm like, okay. So I scheduled it, and I saw my ENT, and he's like, Mr. Clemente, he's like, there's a lot of inflammation in your right nostril. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you're a B-cell lymphoma survivor, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, do you know B-cells can live in the nasal cavity? I'm like, what? I mean, honestly, AJ, I thought that he was going to give me nasal medication. That's why I went there. I mean, I didn't know that. I wasn't experiencing the night sweats or the distension like I did last time. And I was told even 10 years ago that if the lymphoma was to come back, it would most likely show up in the same area. That's how it works. I'm like, okay. So he's like, and this is key. This is so key. And he did right by me. And even my oncologist, he said to me, I've been burned as a doctor before, so let's do what's right. And he's like, let's get a MRI. So I got an MRI. He's like, oh, it looks a little strange. He's like, let's do a biopsy in the office. So he took a little sample, and crazy enough, I got the My Chart notification on a Friday at 3 p.m. And the next day was supposed to be my 25th college reunion, which I was emailing people that I was excited about weeks prior. And I just didn't have the heart or the stamina or even the wherewithal to go. And so I basically ghosted everyone. My oncologist was off that day. I called his office, and they're like, Mr. Clemente, he's off. And then I called again because I was very distraught. And then they're like, okay, let me see if we can contact him. He called me an hour later, and I saw him on that Monday, and he took an hour and a half with me to explain the comprehensive and grueling, what they call relapse or refractory lymphoma would entail. I looked at him and I said, Dr. Steinberg, do you really think I could do this? And he's like, yeah, I think you can. And then I started treatment.
That's amazing. And to face cancer not once, but twice, I can't imagine what that's like. And I have my own journey with my heart. And it's interesting, as you were talking, I was thinking, the distance between my two were 2016 to 2024. You were 2014 to 2024. So sort of roughly the same time period. And I thought I was doing all the right things in between my two events, like really. So it was pretty destabilizing, I can imagine, for you too. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a lot to process and a lot to go through in any lifetime. And I'm glad you're here, and we can have a really good conversation. And you and I could probably go down all sorts of survivor rabbit holes, yes, but this is not a survivor podcast. I really appreciate you opening up and sharing. That's powerful. I can imagine what the answer to this will be, but I think it's fair to ask, coming out of number 2, and maybe it was number 1, I'll let you answer it this way, and I'm talking about your cancer. How did your perspective shift? Tell me about your perspective before, and then let's talk about the shift.
So the perspective the first time was, let me do chemo, let me see where I stand, and let me go from there. And that was okay. This time around, because it was a relapse, and because relapses are considered very, very, very serious, which involved 2 3-day hospital stays, stem cell harvesting, injecting myself in order to activate the stem cells, sitting for about 7 hours straight for them to harvest it, getting a neck catheter that I had to have with me for a few days, then getting the stem cell transplant, spending 29 days in the hospital, which roughly, usually people spend 21, but I too had a heart situation where I had tachycardia. Every time I would stand up, my heart would go 160, 170, to the point where one night it was so bad that they had to rush me to ICU in order to give me norepinephrine. And then in addition to that, leaving the hospital, doing physical therapy, then my oncologist asking me if I wanted to do a clinical trial, even though at that point I was technically medically considered complete response to treatment or complete remission. I chose to do it because he said to me, it's like an insurance policy. So I did 5 months of immunotherapy, which focuses on activating the immune cells. And even though my sister said to me, why would you do that? You just went through like a year and something. I said, because if I don't, then I would always wonder if it came back again, did I do the whole full protocol? So after that, and doing a whole bunch of wellness integrated modalities, because I'm a board certified wellness coach, that was the one, because it forced me to go so deep. And it wasn't really, AJ, for me about dying so much as not fulfilling my potential. And I know to some people that might sound like I'm an overachiever, and maybe I am. But for me, I really believe that life is a series of experiences that you teach yourself and you teach others through how you live it. And so I didn't really feel like my story was fully done yet. And I know a lot of people would feel this way. But for me, that was the core element of the experience itself. I think what it really, really taught me was this idea of surrendering, but not surrendering to what the worst that could happen, but surrendering to something that even I myself might not believe in the moment.
That notion of not fulfilling your potential, that hit home with me. I could relate as you said those words about my own situation. What do you do if you don't feel like you're fulfilling your potential? I mean, you've had this 2 brushes with death. Could have gone either way. We're glad it went the way it did, of course. You've had a successful career up until this point, but you come out of this and you realize, I'm not fulfilling my potential. How did you feel about that and what did you do?
Prior to that July 2024 relapse and prior to going to India, I also did a TEDx talk. And prior to that, my editor sent me, it's not even what I cover, which is entertainment. He sent me to cover the red carpet at the Oscars. So I literally did all 3 back to back, including a glorious 8-city tour of India, right? And experiencing, and I wrote about it, this idea of separateness, that I myself is not separate from, even though my background is Indian, I've not been to India prior to that for like 25, 26 years. And seeing the disparity and the opulence, like the actual juxtaposition of that was just startling to me. It really, really honed in on the fact that everything could be taken away from you, that I felt in life, I was on such a high trajectory, like this is amazing. And then this was just something that was just literally taken away. And the surrender wasn't surrendering with this idea of creating that or recreating that or wanting that, because that's a form of desire. And Eastern philosophy will tell you that's a form of suffering at the end of the day, because that's just not sustainable. You can't just live like that completely. And although some people try, it was more about the fact that I surrendered to even a greater vision that I could even have imagined, knowing that it could have just ended because I could have died, or knowing that the experience itself would leave me with side effects and not myself again, and taking medications that I didn't want to take, having to constantly be labeled as a cancer survivor now twice, because that in itself, and people won't talk about it, but it's true, it's triggering to a lot of people. They themselves either clam up because they have an experience with someone in their life or themselves, and they just don't want to talk about it.
I hear that, and I appreciate that you do talk about it, because that's helping people. That is absolutely helping people. What is potential, and how do we fulfill it? Is our potential the top of the industry, top of the game, top of a great husband, father, son, cousin, nephew, whatever that is, role, uncle? Is it writing books or putting your inner creative into the universe? Maybe it's through a book, music, art. What is it? How do we get our arms around that?
I think the first thing to do in understanding potential is trying to determine and flesh out, is it self-potential that you ascribe to yourself, or is it potential that was ascribed to you? So in other words, is it things that were said during childhood and early adulthood and into your experience of the world itself, or your own machinations, right? And we have so much access to content out there, like so much that we feel less than. And so is it that potential? Is it trying to live up to that potential? So I think the first thing is to evaluate what that potential is and where that potential originated from. Okay, so that's one. So if you're saying it's self-ascribed potential, yeah, I would say most of it was. I wasn't in the hospital bed thinking to myself, oh, damn, I really wish I was like at the Oscars again. No, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about, I need to make it to the next day. I need to look to make sure that my vitals for today, my platelets, my red blood cells, all the four main things that they're looking for a lymphoma patient is up to par. And so what I would do is and you're going to laugh, and some people would think it's a little strange, but I would go into my phone, and when they did my vitals every 4 hours and something looked quote unquote high, I would put into AI. And I would say, is this something I need to ask them about? Is this something I need to be concerned about? Or is this just what needs to be done because I'm in treatment right now at the moment? One would then say, well, okay, so are you living up to the potential of what the doctors are expecting you to do because you're a patient in the hospital, getting treatment in a quarantine room because you're a stem cell transplant patient? So I think it's very nuanced, but I think it's important. And I love the fact that we're discussing this actually, because it's like, where does that idea of potential come from? And, this is just reminding me, and I'm sorry if I'm going off on a tangent, but I love the animated superhero shows, like the old ones from like the 90s to the 2000s. And there was this episode of, I don't know who I think it was Superman's nemesis. Anyway, he created this, forget the name of it. It's basically this super robot. And the robot asked a simple question. It was trying to find purpose. Why was I created? What's my purpose? The robot could do anything. Literally, the robot was able to disintegrate worlds and then ask that question. So I'm just saying, when it comes to purpose and it comes to potential, they bleed together very, very closely.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. This is why I'm drilling in on what you said, because I think it's really interesting. It's certainly in light of your perspective as a 2-time survivor. What does potential look like to you? I tend to agree that I think it is that there is what'd you use? The term bleeding. There's overlap, right? I believe, and I agree with you. Do you feel pressure to fulfill your potential based on the context of what we're talking about? How do you feel about that now?
It's interesting because that's what I speak to on keynotes with healthcare leaders. I speak about pressure. I speak about the fact that surviving the crisis is not really the challenge. The challenge is really what begins after the crisis. When that operating system, and in my case, 2 operating systems, I literally had like a Commodore in me that fizzled out, and I had like an old Apple operating system that fizzled out. But I know that performance, right? So it's interesting because I think this, and I'm going to share this. Since I got diagnosed till now, I've known 8 people who passed away from cancer, and some of them it was only their first time. And I'm talking about different kinds of cancer, not just lymphoma. And so I think a part of me feels that because I'm given a 3rd chance, most people only get 2 if they're lucky, that I owe it to myself to try really hard at figuring out, how do I exist? How do I stay? How do I express embodiment in the physical? How do I allow myself to feel that the rug might not be pulled underneath you again and again? I think it's important for me to have that as an anchor. Because if I don't have that as an anchor, and I think that this was just the luck of the draw or frivolous, and we can get into religious overtones here. I grew up Catholic. I studied vast amounts of comparative belief systems throughout my life. I relate to many of them, And I find truth in many of them. I think at the end of the day, no one can really answer that question. But I think to really ferret it out, the best way that I know how is to actually touch upon what feels right to me. And what feels right to me is that I owe it to myself and maybe to others, who knows, to just find my way forward instead of backward.
Yeah, I won't forget when after my second cardiac event, my cardiologist urged me to retire. All I could think of is I have unfinished business. And I guess that's sort of saying what you were just saying about fulfilling potential. So that's why it really landed with me. What are you doing now? And how did you get there?
After the first bout, I wrote a best-selling book. I interviewed 200 cancer survivors. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. And one of the threads in it was this idea of forgiveness, not forgiveness that cancer happened to them, but forgiveness for themselves for things that missteps that they didn't take or they should have taken, and forgiveness for other people that did it to them as well.
What's the title of your book so everyone knows what it is?
It's called I Survived Cancer. Here is How I Did It. 35 cancer survivors share their journey. And I chose 35 stories because I wanted to highlight different types of cancers, different ethnicities, different age groups. And I told them specifically in the contribution, because it was an interview series that turned into a book, it was a compilation, that I wanted them to promote themselves. They're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I want you to promote yourself because I want people to see at the end of that interview that you're living, that you're doing, that you're being, and it's visible for the world to see, that you're not cowering for what has been done to you. A great interview that I had mentioned this idea of the body betraying her. She felt like the body literally betrayed her. She cannot trust it anymore. I mean, I could say that a lot, AJ, but one thing that I say in my keynotes and I say to others is I can speak all day to the wound, and I'm sure you can as well, but I would rather speak to the walk, what happens after it. And that's what I speak about. So I'm a best-selling author. I'm a board-certified wellness coach. I coach executives and individuals who have that level of crisis in their life, but what's the next sort of steps after that? Keynote speaker as well. And sort of this idea that we can go through adversity and disruption, but how do we regain clarity and composure from that disruption? As you know, the world itself is under major disruption, politically, socially, and also technologically with AI. So it really speaks to the heart of what people are experiencing.
How would you classify this career move? Like a full pivot, a redirect from like journalism?
2014 was a full pivot, and I knew something was happening. Of course, no one foresaw COVID, right? That's 6 years later, but I knew something was happening, and I'm like, I have to take. And I consciously knew I had to wait 5 years. Because of the 5 years they kept telling me, because I'm like, well, if I start something and I have a relapse, then what did I build and create? It's like a waste. So I'm like, okay, after 5 years, and I had the courage after the 5 years to actually start. So it was a massive pivot, and it took courage and bravery and all that, but it also took this idea that what do I have to lose, right? And now we're here almost 11 years later. I had a relapse, and I can ask that same question.
And that's an interesting question, right? Because I think a lot of people who might not have as a severe an awakening as someone like you, they might be looking out the window at work or at home on the weekend and just reflecting and wondering, is this it for me? Is this all that this is going to be? And they contemplate a change, but they never get to the point where they leap or take a step, a baby step even, in that direction. The risk for them is probably pretty high, or perceived risk is high. I've got kids in college. How am I going to fund tuition? Maybe I care for aging parents in some capacity. I need to have some funds on the side. I got a big mortgage. I worked so hard to get this house and live in this neighborhood. I don't want to put that on the line. The cost of reinventing. I've been in whatever industry for 20-ish years. I don't have the energy to reinvent myself. How do you advise people like that with that through the lens of what do you have to lose?
Well, I come from an interesting background, right? So I've lived the experience twice. I keynote on it. I'm a coach, executive coach, who talks about this with clients. I wrote a book about it. And then I've interviewed now at this point, 2,000 individuals from high performance to celebrities about this. And I think the key there is, and it's really simple, is we put so much cognitive load and cognitive pressure on ourselves, the fatigue of it all, it's just what keeps us not wanting to move. So first one is to identify for yourself. And this is coming classic from the trainings of positive psychology in general, is that it's considered the trans-theoretical model of change, or the stages of change. And it posits something very simple, is that it's not that people are afraid to change. They don't know how to change. They don't know if they're contemplating it, pre-contemplating it, wanting to be in action of it, wanting to do it, then wanting to revert back because it's too much. So first, let's identify exactly what it is. Then the second thing is really to have some level of self-regulation, right? If you're spinning or you're just doom scrolling, that's not handling any situation. That's just avoidance. Then you need to do, I would say, some level of psychological distancing. So not detachment, not disassociation, just have that mental space between what you're distressing about, that thought or that emotion, and what is actually going on, using tools like this idea of metacognition, right? Which is, first we were taught intellect is really like the barometer we all need to reach. Then we were taught, no, emotional IQ is really it. Now the research is clear. It's metacognition. It's the thinking of the thinking. People can get into those states in many different ways. People get into it in flow. People can do it through prayer, through meditation, even to breathing, taking a walk. That's part of that. And so I can get into all this quasi information about consciousness and where it resides and all that, but that's just really sort of dulling the larger point. The larger point is really for people to assess what is going on with self, because it always starts from that base. And so in my TEDx talk, I talk about a really easy acronym. It's called ALOHA. Aloha, as we know, in Hawaiian means hello. So it's just hello to your inner self. A stands for acknowledge. So acknowledge where you are, what's going on. Like, don't try to fool yourself. Really acknowledge it. Try to figure out what's happening. Listen to yourself. So it's listening to those grumblings, inner workings. I mean, you mentioned 5 things that can deter anyone from wanting to move forward. So just don't even judge it. Just listen to it. And then I would say, if you're someone who likes to delve into different healing modalities, which I have done many of them, the origins of this Hawaiian sort of healing is called Huna healing. And back in the day, they would teach about talking to the body. So talking to the head, talking to the gut, talking to the heart. It sounds woo-woo. It sounds strange. I don't expect people to do this with other people. You're going to sound like you're hearing voices and talking to yourself. But really, really listen and try to see actually with breath and intention and purpose what's actually going on. So that's the L part. O is opening. So don't judge it. Open yourself up to these things, explore them. I would say the great anthropologist Margaret Mead always used to go into a situation and she would always not judge it. She would just live it. She would live it, record it, and express it. And I think that's what we all should really be doing with ourselves. Even myself, as someone who's now a 2-time cancer survivor, I don't like to put myself in a bucket of that. H stands for harnessing. So harness the positive benefits of all this. And A is having the courage. And courage is the most important thing, is to act upon it. So now acting upon it doesn't mean just quit your job and not have a fallback. That's not really being sensible. That's not wise. And in today's economy, I don't recommend that. Although I am not a recruiter. Recruiters will tell you this is not a time to be risking that. And so I think all of that, just in a nutshell, is really a great way for them to explore.
You referenced your TED Talk, and I'm glad you did, because I was going to get there in our conversation. So let's get into it. So one thing I really like, just a quick aside, I think you referred to yourself as like a human pincushion or something like that. And boy, I could relate. That doesn't it feel that way in the ER? You're just like, come poke me. Just have at it, everybody. Where else do you want to poke me? I do remember that from my own experiences in ER. That's a good term. I really enjoyed that. And one of the things that jumped out to me in the talk you gave was self-care, self-love. Share with everyone what you mean by that.
So the title of my TEDx talk is 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And I ask without giving away the talk, because I want people to see it, is really saying to yourself, have you ever stared in the mirror and not recognized yourself? That's just the basic nutshell of it all. For a long time, even before cancer, I had a hard time with that reflection that stared back at me. Not because I hated it or I was saying mean things to it, but it was more of not really wanting to embrace it. And so that is really the crux of loving yourself, right? Or accepting yourself or coming to terms with yourself, because horrible things have happened to all of us. Some people's gradient is a lot higher than others. I think it behooves us to try to unpack that in a way. There was this singer in the 90s, and she still sings, but her name was Erykah Badu, and she sang this one song, and the phrase goes, didn't they ever tell you that you can let the bags go? Like, didn't someone ever tell you that you didn't have to carry all those bags? And I really keep that close to my heart.
When you said that on your talk, when I was listening to it, it really rang home with me. Establishing self-compassion is one of the pillars of the MORE methodology. And that's really understanding who you are and giving yourself space to understand who you are, and it's okay. And you're choosing you, and it's okay. For a lot of people, they need permission to do that. I know there will be some grumpy people out there or naysayers who are like, I don't believe in that. That's not it. And I'm too busy achieving to have time for that. I think it's one of the most important things you can do. And this is learned experience for me, for my own life. But after having gone through what I went through, one of the first things as I thought about building out my company more and helping people was around, we've got to help people understand that to love themselves and to choose themselves first and to make sure their foundation is as solid as can be. Because once that's solid, once your base is solid, you can start building this beautiful house on top, as I like to say. I'm down for a good metaphor any day. So when you said that in your talk, I was like, okay, great. Other people are talking about this. Like, this is an important step on the path to wherever you're going. And tell me if you agree with this statement. On the path wherever you're going, a great starting point is this notion of having a ton of self-care, self-compassion. Do you agree? Yes or no?
100%. But I think also, if I could add a little more to your aha with that, is that people reflect back to us what it is that we are deficient in. And if we don't have compassion for other people, there's no way that we can build up self-compassion for ourselves. I liken it to examples and ideologies of Eastern philosophy. They always speak to nature. They always say, in a situation, they would say, the river just flows. It doesn't think about the rock that's obstructing it. It goes under, it goes over. Sometimes it just remains stagnant, but it always finds its way back. It's not forcing or hurrying itself to reach a destination. It's just existing. And so when the river meets an opposition, or meets, in this case, we meet someone who we feel doesn't deserve our compassion. And I'm not trying to say that there's some people who don't deserve compassion, because there are some bad players out there in the world. But I'm saying, generally speaking, is that their reflection of what it is that we either don't want to face, that we're maybe too afraid to face, or to some degree that we have to find within ourselves and muster up. And so I think self-compassion and compassion go hand in hand. I'm not saying one is greater than the other, but they're like a dance, and they have to be danced properly.
In your journey, what's held you back, and how did you move through it?
I've been fortunate in the sense that I've been surrounded by some really great people, really great family members and friends, mentors, also some situations where I had to outgrow and let people go, because that's a part of life as well. I think what's held me back is I often look at some people who are literally excellent in what they do. And not that I compare myself, because I know I can only be the best version of me. I can't be that person, and that person can't be me. But I often think to myself, or I did at least think to myself, that why even try? That excellence. And I don't envy the excellence. I actually honor the excellence. But I've come to understand something really key, is that their excellence is what makes them, right? And so even if I show an iota of something, right, I can reach that excellence. And maybe I don't reach even excellence. Let's forget the word excellence. That I have to actually allow myself to just realize that maybe you don't have to be excellent at something. Maybe the point is to just do, and to be, and to experience, and to live. Maybe that's the point.
what would be a recommendation you could give our listeners, an idea, a tip, a trick? Maybe we've already covered it and you want to just reiterate it, or something new that could help people who are considering transforming, or they have a loved one who's kind of feeling trapped or even stuck, and they want to encourage that person to make a move, and this could help them. What would you offer up?
I would offer up a little bit more of my background. So when I got my stem cell transplant, which I didn't know, that they actually ascribe additional days after that, meaning after I got my stem cell transplant, it was considered day +1. And they said to me, Mr. Clemente, this is your second birthday. I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, what? And they're like, no, this is an actual it's called medical rebirth. This is your medical rebirth. I'm like, what? Like, is this a woo-woo thing? I'm like, am I being punked? And they're like, no, and this is real. This is real. And so my whole point in mentioning that is that whether this was a medical rebirth or not, or, I regenerated or whatever the case may be, is the fact that there is always time to figure things out, but we allow ourselves to be blocked by only what's in front of us, rather than seeing something maybe that has happened that allows us to get to that next stage. So in other words, what I'm basically saying is that maybe, just maybe, the cancer relapse was a way for me to get to this point that I've always wanted to be at. It just took a medical situation, a dire one at that, to get me there. And I know this is radical, and I'm going to ruffle some feathers. And I'm not saying that cancer was a blessing, because I was asked that the first time. And I'm not saying that it was a double blessing because I got it again. I'm just saying that given my situation, my effort, my persistence, my love, my attention, my desire, my tools, the medical healthcare system, my wellness background, just maybe I'm here to express that to other people. That maybe the surrendering is just allowing as opposed to disallowing.
Where can people find you, Savio P. Clemente?
They can find me on my website, Savio P. Clemente. So it's SAVIO as in Peter, CLEMENTE. On there, I obviously have my keynotes. I think I have a few more spots in 2026 because they book up really quickly. I also have my TEDx talk there. And I have a weekly newsletter that I publish every Wednesday. It's called The Human Resolve. It's a Substack newsletter. And in there, I talk about head, heart, and gut intelligence. I cover my interviews and strategies to just restore that big C, not cancer, but clarity. We all need it. So clarity, composure, and performance. And on social media, they can find me at The Human Resolve, because I believe that the resolve is afforded to all of us. And if I can quote one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, hope is always a good thing. It never dies.
You quoted one of my favorite movies of all time. So I think that's a brilliant way to end. If you want to book Savio P. Clemente, go to his website, line him up for a keynote, have him come talk to your organization or team, check out his book, check out his TEDx talk. Thank you so much, Savio, for coming on Code 3 Life Reinvented. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Some really key things that jumped out to me, and I'm still thinking about this point about fulfilling potential. What really is that word potential mean, and how does it overlap or bleed into purpose, as we talked about on the show? I want to reiterate that the framework that Savio introduced to us, the aloha message, not only does that make me think of Hawaii, which is a place I love, but A, for acknowledge what's going on, L, listen to yourself, O, open yourself up, H, harness positive benefits, and A, act upon it. Aloha, a really cool framework that you can start working with today, and take care of yourself. Life can be a challenge, and it's okay to be imperfect and to choose you and give yourself space in the form of self-care / self-compassion. If this conversation resonated with you, I invite you to explore our website, bemorealigned.com. It is the home of More, a destination for high-achieving, accomplished professionals who've been successful, but know something no longer fits. They're looking for an escape path to what's next. We exist at Is More for those at this crossroads who are ready to move beyond autopilot, get radically honest, and build a life that's aligned with who they are now. You can always reach me. I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback on an episode, or you want to pitch me as a guest or introduce me to someone who could be a guest, please reach out to me at hello@bemorealigned.com. And remember, life doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It waits for the moment you decide to stop settling. When your status quo feels like status no, it's time to listen and act. I'm AJ Jones. Until next time, stay honest, stay aligned, and don't wait for the wake-up call.